We are continuing today with our series in the beginning, looking at the stories at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis. And we're a third week of stories just about Abraham. Does anybody here, different TV program, fans of EastEnders? Anybody else watch it? Few people watch it. So we used to watch it a lot, and then we kind of completely lost watching it. But we decided to watch it this week because it was the 40th anniversary. And it was like every scene there was something dramatic, or it just left on tension after moment after moment. And what we found at the beginning of Genesis, it is just like, just scene, dramatic scene after dramatic scene after dramatic scene. And today's story is maybe one of the most emotive and moving scenes of drama in all the Bible, frankly, anywhere else. And remember, the kind of lead up to this, and Abraham is at least 100 years old when this happens, probably a little bit more older. And Isaac, he had to wait 25 years from the promise to him being born. So there's all this kind of lead up. And as we kind of had, especially kind of the last few weeks, some of these stories take us out of our comfort zone. Whether that was recently Abraham and Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, Sarah and Hagar. I called her a Haggai the other week. Hagar. And today, Abraham and Isaac. Is God a monster for even asking it? How and why would God ask what he's about to ask in this story? How could Abraham even consider going through with it? What would I have done in that situation? And we'll see a little bit about what it reveals about us and God. And as Jill comes forward just now to give us our reading for the day, I want you to think this. What am I willing to give up for God? So as Jill reads, just have that thought nagging in your mind. What am I willing to give up for God? Thank you, Jill.
Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 to 18. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son, Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me."
I wonder if you were using an EastEnders edit during that story, quite where you would put the doof, 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 doof. How is it possible that Abraham was even ready to respond to that call? First thing I want to say is Abraham was ready. Abraham was ready. That's the way that God says at the beginning of here. God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham," and he went, "Here I am." Just like that. "Here I am." Not oh, it's God. "Here I am." He's ready to hear from God. He has, we think about church as a family, he has a relationship with God. He's available to speak to God. His attitude, you remember the wonderful Harry Enfield's character, Kevin, the teenager? Whoa! When God speaks, how is Abraham? "Here I am," not a whoa. And I wonder if God is wanting to speak, what end of the spectrum are we? Are we a "Here I am"? Are we a whoa? Or are we whoa? Abraham is ready to hear from God. We can be the most brilliant, gifted people in the world. But if we're not making ourselves available, how is God going to work through us? Verse 2, God said, "Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go straight to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you." Is God a monster for even asking it? The first clue that we have of that is right at the beginning. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. It's a test. Kind of that language there means like to prove. To prove it. So whether it's Abraham proving his faith, or even maybe for people later that they know who Abraham was as a proof to other people. We kind of are in this part of the story, we know how the story ends. So we kind of got this whole story arc. It's like, I don't know, having the EastEnders thing on, you just catch the last 5 minutes and think, okay, I'll go back and watch it from the beginning now. God is never expecting him to actually go through with the final act. Deuteronomy 12 says God hates child sacrifice. It's a test where God has already started to reveal the answers to the exam question to him. Take your son, your only son who you love. Straight away, it's almost like saying, we obviously know the story. We covered and thought about Ishmael last week, but he's saying this is your only son in this moment. This is your only son. This is the child of the promise. Through all the generations will come. It's a reminder to him as he's saying it. God actually politely says, this language isn't quite there, but the way he actually asks him is, please. It is like, again, that relationship part of it. The hints are, it's going to be okay. The second thing, we kind of have to remember is we have this image of Abraham leading up a young child up this hill. But that would be a mistake, because it also tells us Abraham gives Isaac the wood for the sacrifice to carry on his own back. So that's going to be a substantial amount of wood if it's going to be enough to burn someone. So Isaac wasn't a tiny young child. He could be anywhere, depending how you read the passages before, to the ones after, anywhere between the age of 4 and 36, but probably at least late teens or early 20s to be able to do that physical act. Abraham was ready, but how was he able to actually try and go through with it? Firstly, he's not alone in it. Isaac is obviously choosing to go along with this plan. We don't know the conversation that happened to them, but Abraham is over 100 years old. Isaac is clearly a very fit, strong young man, given that he's just lumped all this wood up a mountain climb. So if anyone else watching Gladiators, I love watching Gladiators each week. And you get it though, if you see the size of these, particularly the guys, I mean, they are enormous. You know, they've got like arm muscles like I've got a waist size. They are huge. And you see kind of, they have the contenders, and you see the contenders come up in front of them, and these gladiators just look down on them. I mean, the size difference is huge. The strength difference is huge. Abraham is over 100 years old. Isaac is a fit as a fiddle, strong person. One-on-one, on a surprise, I'm going to get you, Isaac wins it every single time. But it tells us that two of them went on together. Abraham and Isaac trusted God's promise. They trusted that he was the child of the promise. Abraham knows the answer to the test. Do you know how we had a couple of weeks ago, as soon as Abraham knows about what's going to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah, remember the whole thing, he starts to barter with God. Oh, if we could just knock it down a bit, if we could just. This is his one and only beloved son. He doesn't do any of that. Because he trusts in the promise. And in verse 5, he says, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship." Not I will worship while I sacrifice. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. They are, to quote the verse in Hebrews which mentions this story, sure of what they hope for and certain of what they do not see. So Abraham is ready. He's also willing as he trusted God for the solution. In the Doctor Who clip, he says, "Trust me this one time." And then he has to Clara looks back and he says, "Yeah, and all the others too." Clara is only able to really trust the Doctor in that moment because she has trusted him in the other stories too. Abraham is only able to trust because at last, and eventually through, as we've found out, he's not a perfect character, but finally, his experience has led him to trust in God. From Genesis chapter 12, the original go, through the stories of Lot to the birth of Isaac, he's able to say, God will provide. He knew that he wasn't in himself able to do it, but he knew God was. Here I am is a way of saying, I am available for you to work, God. Are we ready and able and willing to offer up what's most important to us? Another TV programme. Anybody watch the first episode of Britain's Got Talent last night? Nobody watches quality TV around here. And in these kind of acts, you always get the bit where they hit the cross, no more. But also there's always that kind of way where they go through and vote for the different acts. And they'll say it's a yes from me, or it's a no from me, as they decide who's going through to the next round. And when God asks you to give up something, it's a yes from me, or whoa, it's a no from me. Jesus had a similar story with it's called the rich young ruler. And basically that comes to it. It says, Jesus says, well, okay, will you give up your wealth and come and follow me? And the rich young ruler is like, well, no, it's a no from me. All things come from God, and of his own do we give you. It is not often God will actually say to us, go through and actually give up that thing. But are we willing to in the first place? Whatever it is. Are you ready, able, and willing to give? See, worship is about giving our best to God. It is about, at times, having to say, my act of worship is to give up my dreams, give up future, give up my name. And in the story of Abraham, in that culture of that time, salvation was seen as having the child, having the children to come, the name being carried on. That was a way that people understood salvation, that you were remembered in name by your family. But only by being ready, willing, and able to give up those things does he actually gain God's salvation? Because we go back to that whole point from back in the story, Genesis again. Which will you choose? Will you choose that God is right, or will you choose that you're right? Will we choose our own way of choosing what's right, or will we choose God's way? And Abraham has that choice, and he says to God, it is yes from me. What is your line where you say, it's a no from me? What was a sacrifice? What was a burnt offering? Well, those things, you'd have the animal, in this case, what was being suggested was Isaac, and you would burn everything. And in some ways, it represented the person offering the sacrifice. So it was saying, I'm giving all of this because I am giving you in worship everything of me. And it was also there to say, well, this is a way of taking sin away, providing an opportunity for sin to be taken. If God, though, in our story here, provides a lamb, it represents God saying, I fully give myself as a sacrifice. God saying, I will provide it. I provide the sacrifice. And thousands of years later, God's one and only Son, God's best, walked up a hill of his own choice, but also the Father's choice, with wood on his back. This story of Abraham happened in the region of Moriah. The story in Chronicles tells us Jerusalem, the temple, was built on a mountain in Moriah. It's not necessarily the same one, but it's certainly in the same area. So these thousands of years later, God's begotten Son walks up a hill with wood for the sacrifice on his back. In the story of Abraham, there is a sacrifice that is found in a thicket, which of course would be covered in thorns. And the Son of God says, I fully give myself to provide a sacrifice for sin. In the Doctor Who clip, he wants Clara to jump. Trust me. But the Doctor is also prepared to jump. Are you willing to take a leap, a jump of faith for what God is calling you to do? God asked no more of Abraham than he was willing to do himself. In fact, he did more. Whenever God calls and says trust, he is there too. And so, for some of you here today, it might be that what God is saying, the leap of faith, is to trust him and to start following him. Or maybe you think, actually, to trust him and start following him again. Maybe he's actually saying you need to speak to somebody about something. Maybe his leap of faith he's saying is, I am asking you to forgive that person. And that is a leap of faith. Maybe he's asking you to give up something. or do something. Maybe he's asking you to offer up something. But he's saying, will you jump with me? Are you ready? Are you willing? Or are you able? We all have to answer that. And we'll all ultimately say, it's a yes from me, or it's a no from me.